This episode is brought to you by NPR's Life Kit podcast. Let me tell you a true story. I was just outside in my backyard doing a little gardening and, as always, absolutely getting demolished by mosquitoes. Then I came in to record this very message right here about NPR's Life Kit, a show that gives you useful guidance to live your life a little better. And guess what their most recent episode is about? How to actually make yourself less attractive to mosquitoes. See, that is exactly the kind of advice you get from Life Kit, from fitness routines to mental resilience to navigating personal goals. Life Kit offers real stories, relevant insights, and clear takeaways. Finances, parenting, household chores. It's not just self-improvement. It is about living a better life starting right now. And yes, there's advice about mosquitoes. Look, I'm not going to spoil that episode for you. You should go listen to it. But that citronella candle, it's probably not doing anything. Anyway, go check out their list of episodes. I'm sure you will find something with some advice that you are looking for. Listen now to the Life Kit podcast from NPR. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, July 23rd, 1892, Russian-American anarchist, activist, and author Alexander Berkman sets out to kill Henry Clay Frick. You may not know Berkman's name, but you likely know Frick's, one of the wealthiest men in America, would go on to be a famed businessman, an art collector, and philanthropist. At this point, 1892, he was the chairman of the Carnegie Steel Corporation, which was in the middle of a brutal crackdown on striking workers at the Homestead mill in Pennsylvania. I don't know if we've done the Homestead strike. We've done lots of other similar labor showdowns in this era. We will lay out more of that context, but on this day, Berkman breaks into Frick's office and fires shots, pulls out a knife, tries to kill the mogul. It did not work, but it became a massive story and changed the narrative around the strike, around unions, around labor relations, and lots more. So here to discuss a story that, and I'll just go ahead and say it, a story that makes us think of Luigi Mangione, kind of before Luigi Mangione. Here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hey there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So I laid out the two main characters here, and let's sort of get to know these two characters, then set the context, and then bring them together in that assassination attempt. But why don't we start with the mogul? Let's start with Henry Clay Frick. What do we need to know about this man?
I love talking about Frick because he's one of those people that, you know, when things were getting renamed in that period between 2017 and 2020, I was like, somebody needs to come for Frick. We weren't going after 20th century people, but this guy is a bad dude. So who is Frick? Frick started off life as a farmhand, a bookkeeper, and during this Gilded Age period where Americans were starting to see some of the first millionaires in the country, Frick makes himself a millionaire. By age 30, he aligns himself with Andrew Carnegie. He becomes the chairman of Carnegie Steel Empire. He eventually then turns his attention to the railroads, where there's also plenty of money to be made. He is one of those rich dudes who thinks that the law doesn't apply to him. So he gets a car and starts speeding his way down the roads, irritating the police in the early 1900s. When a newspaper makes fun of him, he tells one of his aides, go buy that newspaper. He thinks he could buy his way out of everything. And actually in the early 1900s, you could.
You kind of can.
Actually, in the mid-2020s, you can, apparently. So anyway, so Frick, the reason that he's a baddie and not just a millionaire, although those two things often come side by side, is because he was an ardent and eager strike breaker. When it came to putting down unions and breaking the back of worker solidarity, he loved it. He especially loved it if he could shoot a few workers, which was something that would happen in some of his strike breaking. He just he hated unions with every fiber of his being. And it was also this person who, even his biographers tend to write about him as just a cold, cold person. And that translates into his politics in a lot of ways. And so that's who Frick is. He's a guy who's going to break the back of your union, and he's going to enjoy every second of it.
Frick was not hugged enough, That's right. Frick, who hurt you? Yeah. Who hurt you? I mean, that's kind of...
His answer would be poor people.
Yeah, I know, really. I mean, he's that kind of a SOB.
Yeah. But yeah, he was not hugged. He would probably not be a good hugger. I mean, one of his biographers described him, no man on earth could get close to him or fathom him. He seemed more like a machine without emotion or impulse. So quite the character. And, you know, in many ways, a character who is easy to vilify because he acts in villainous ways.
Because he's a villain.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But that kind of then lets us understand where we get to the second character in the story, Alexander Berkman. So, you know, we know that Alexander Berkman eventually comes up with this scheme to kill Frick, but how does he get to that point?
Well, he doesn't start out there. He starts out being born actually into a wealthy Jewish family in the Russian Empire, which was like present-day Lithuania. And then he migrates to the United States in 1888. It was said that he was near the Tsar of Alexander's when he was assassinated by bomb in 1881, that Berkman is like there to witness the explosion. So that's kind of traumatic. And he, even as a child, was known as being someone who was pretty intense. He was an atheist before atheism was quite the thing. It actually causes him to get kicked out of school because he disavows God's existence for years. And teachers were like, that's it, we're kicking you out of school. So as a result, he decides that he wants to get involved with labor and becomes a proponent of anarchism. He forms this campaign to free the men who are convicted in the 1886 Haymarket bombing. And really part of this is because he falls under the influence of a man by the name of Johann Most, who is one of the most famous anarchists in United States history and had all of this sort of propaganda about encouraging mass revolt and encouraging people to sort of rise up and topple these authoritarian regimes or these industrialists. And so he buys into that pretty deeply. He works as a typesetter for Most newspaper. Freiheit is the name of his newspaper. And when I said he's kind of intense, he's a person who believes a little bit in self-deprivation. He didn't want any pleasures at all. He felt like all of his resources and energy should go towards the movement, and that anybody that was also a part of this movement should be doing the same thing as well. You know, his friend and family members remarked how every penny, he spent, he thought should go toward the cause. He even came down on his cousin because his cousin brought flowers home, and he's like, "What are you doing? Buying these frivolous things?"
He didn't understand about bread and roses.
Exactly. Yeah. Just bread and not too much.
Yeah, but that idea of self-abnegation, it gives you a sense of his intensity. Every molecule of his being has to be to the cause, and that's how you get a person like Berkman as an anarchist. And anarchists in the United States and across Europe were feared at the time because they did resort to bombings and to other forms of violence. And before there's a Red Scare, there's kind of an anarchism scare in the United States. And the Haymarket bombing was part of that, that Berkman is organizing against. And then he becomes part of this movement, and actually a critical part of this movement because of his interactions with Frick.
Some of the other names, the people who he's running in circles with, obviously there's this guy, Johann Most, but, Emma Goldman, this is Emma Goldman era. She's very prominent at that point, very feared by the powers that be. We've talked about a number of the strikes. We've talked about the IWW being sort of very active in this moment. The only other thing I'll add is just kind of radical politics and labor organizing was a way that a lot of immigrants kind of found community in this country, in part because those are the jobs they got, and that's where they got organized. But, there's a familiar story here about the sort of cultural world that he enters. If you're an immigrant from Eastern Europe and you come to this country and you're a laborer, you're going to fall into radical politics. You're going to start running in circles with these. It's very likely. And that's what happens to him. Though he's also clearly a just true believer.
And when you say community, Jody, you mentioned Emma Goldman, that was his on and off again partner, right?
Yeah.
These are deep affective ties in addition to sort of shared politics and shared solidarity.
Yeah.
Hey, this is David Rind. I'm an audio producer at CNN. And one of my favorite things about working at CNN is that I can call up our super smart correspondents and reporters whenever I want to pick their brains about the news and the stories they're covering. Well, I want to bring you in on those conversations with our podcast, CNN One Thing. Each week, I grab one of those said reporters and we break down one big story that's been making headlines. Again, the podcast is CNN One Thing. Listen on your favorite podcast app.
I want to take a moment to tell you about Quince, your solution to stylish summer clothes. Now, I am recording this very spot on what I would say is the first true summer day here where I live. It is hot. It is sunny. I'm not going to lie. It's a little sticky even down here in my office. It is all those things, but it can still also be stylish. To me, peak summer is the time to go back to those reliable, high-quality staples in your wardrobe. Obviously, there's linen. And lucky for you, Quince has a ton of great linen clothing, from button-downs to pants to shorts. I have fully flipped the switch to linen, sometimes all linen. I am wearing my 100% European linen drawstring beach pants right now. They go great with sandals, but I can also dress them up a little bit if I want to throw on a button-down or even a light jacket. By the way, those linen pants, they're under $50. How does Quince do this? Well, it's by working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman. Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. Stay cool out there, folks. I don't know if we've done an episode about the strike at the Homestead mill, but it is one of the more kind of notorious and brutal labor stories of the era, and it follows a lot of the similar patterns of other ones we've done. But, we have a strike here at the mill, and I mean, the main thing is that Frick gives no quarter whatsoever. He sees this, as we described. He is, with every fiber of his being, he basically wants to break the back of labor, and he sees this as a moment to really, really double down. And so, he does a lot of the very similar things, but, they try and cut the wages. There's the strike. They bring in scabs. They bring in the Pinkerton Detective Agency to break the picket lines, heavily armed men. On July 6th, the gunfight breaks out. 9 union workers and 7 guards are killed in that 12-hour fight. And then Frick also then aligns with the state militia to come in to try and break the strike and keep the plant operating. So the tension is just ratcheting. It is becoming kind of a cause celeb, and it is also very notorious around the country. It's being covered. And in here, I think, probably rightfully so, but the organizers, including Emma Goldman and now Berkman is on the scene, kind of hone in on Frick as the number one villain here. And I think that is the impetus, is basically we need to do something bold and high profile, and we need to basically shake people out of their stupor. And that's where they come up with the idea to kill Frick.
I mean, Frick is so unyielding. I mean, during a time in which people are trying to negotiate for a raise, and it's not we want 10%, okay, 5%. He's like, how about I cut your wages by 18%? How about there's no raise in sight? And I think that kind of unyielding, relentless, we can't even, negotiate with him, is what caused some people to believe, no, you just have to take this person out. There's no negotiating with him, and things will actually only get worse. And things did get worse. So not saying that this is right to assassinate him, but for those who felt that way, they didn't feel as though there was an alternative way to improve their working conditions without him being taken out of the picture.
It's a flawed but very common theory of history that there is one person who is responsible for these systemic cruelties. And Frick was absolutely responsible for cruelties, but he was also supported by a broader system. But when the anarchists are looking at this moment, they see public sentiment turning against Frick precisely because he was so cold-hearted and violent. And this is when Berkman gets the idea that, Frick is responsible for this. He has to be made to stand for the consequences. And if we can get him out of the way, then that will be this moment that brings the workers together and this broader revolt against the system will begin. And so he goes to Frick's office. So he goes to Pittsburgh. He's posing as a representative of a New York hiring company. He has a gun on him. And he does what he came there to do, right? He shoots Frick twice. He shoots him in, I think, in the chest and in the neck.
And the shoulder.
And then he has a dagger. And so he stabs him once he's on the ground. And then he's finally taken down by other people who are in the office at the time. And Frick, as he's he's not unconscious, he's still awake as this is happening. And as other people begin to subdue Berkman, Frick is like, don't shoot him, leave him to the law, and let the law take care of him.
Does this make Frick reconsider his ways?
This is not a story of personal growth, Jody.
There's no transformation. There's no come to Jesus moment. You would think if you got shot in the shoulder and in the neck and almost stabbed, that you might want to rethink some of your decisions. You might want to have some self-reflection. No, he doubles down even more when he realizes that he's not going to die. He basically says, listen, I want this company to pursue the same policy. That's what he tells the press in a press conference, that he is essentially unchanged.
Yeah, he says, we'll pursue the same policy and we will win. He also apparently, when he was lying on the floor and a doctor came in, he told the doctor, make it quick because I got to be back at work on Monday. So, yes.
He refused anesthesia. Like, this guy, there's something not right about him.
I mean, the sort of mirror image of intensity between these two men is pretty obvious, right?
But I also think there's something really interesting, given recent political assassination attempts, that there, again, there's this idea that this is somehow going to fix things, and it tends to make them worse.
So I want to end there, and I want to read actually a quote. Emma Goldman talked about this afterwards and kind of gave an oral history of this moment and the sort of the Homestead strike and the decision to then try and assassinate Frick. And she said that, after the violence and the bloodshed on the ground at the mill, Frick became the responsible factor in the crime. And then she said, we came to feel that a blow aimed at Frick would re-echo in the poorest hovel, would call attention to the whole world to the real cause behind the Homestead struggle, and it would strike terror in the enemy's ranks and make them realize that the proletariat of America had its avengers. That is language that is, incredibly familiar to all sorts of manifestos and other moments throughout history. But, return to you, NIki. Did that happen? Did it arouse? Did it create a psychological moment that aroused America?
I mean, no. But I think
the short answer.
I think that anarchism doesn't go away. There's still true believers in the cause. The labor movement will go forward. There will be reforms in the government in the early 20th century. But no, it doesn't change things. It doesn't disempower Frick. It doesn't disempower capital. And I think that that's the thing to take into account, is that when someone has the power of the state behind them, right, there's a kind of state monopoly on violence, or wealthy person monopoly on violence in this era, when they have all of the resources of their money, when they have connections in media so that how this story is portrayed is going to go in their favor. It is too much to think that an assassination attempt is going to change all of those factors. And in fact, it gives the state permission to crack down on these movements in a way that ultimately redounds to the benefit of the millionaires and the corporations and the state itself. And so you understand what's moving these people, because these are people living in just the most abject poverty, who are being worked to the bone, who are just trying to negotiate for a better life. And they're met with incredible violence. And so they meet that violence with violence. That's not a surprise, and our historian of violence here can probably talk more about it.
Listen, I think what's so mind-boggling about this story is that the things that the workers are asking for will not cost the company their company. It will not run them into the ground. And I think what's really sad about this story is that not only does Frick double down, but in 1893, the company is bringing in about $2 million a year. By 1900, they're bringing $40 million a year. And to all the shareholders, to everyone who's invested in that company, that's real money for them, real profit for them. Not a fraction of that is given to the workers. And I mean, there's no other way to spell greed. This is just the ultimate portrait, I think, of corporate greed and how it extracts ridiculous profit at such a high cost to its laborers.
I do want your thoughts, Kellie, on this. And this episode has introduced a phrase to me, the propaganda of the deed, which is basically, these high-profile acts, often of violence, that try and, bring attention to something. So the Homestead strike gets broken, but public opinion probably, does turn a little bit because of that. People see how violent the crackdown was. And the Carnegie, as much as you pointed out, they make a ton of money. I think their reputation is hurt by that, and it leads to a larger story about unions and labor in this country. The specific act of trying to kill Frick, even most Berkman's idol sort of rejected that and said one of the things we've learned here is that the propaganda of the deed was doomed to be misunderstood in the U.S. and that it could only backfire. And most even actually had this idea that Berkman might have been a flunky who was set up to take this act in order to then have it backfire and garner sympathy for Frick. But Kellie, we've done episodes on this show. You've written many books about these kind of events, often violent events that do break through and they do shake people. So I don't know. How do you square those things?
I don't know. I actually, going back up to the top where NIki was talking about how names of buildings that should have come down. If we were to ask people on the street today about Carnegie or Frick, I don't think people would have a reaction of them being a villain, or they'd be like, Carnegie Hall or Carnegie Mellon, I think that we have lost sort of those villainous ideas don't stay very long in the public memory or imagination. And so because of that, I think you do lose a lot of traction. What was this for? What did this accomplish? Could this have been successful? And because we don't have a whole lot of models of it being successful, alternative ideas are going to need to be fostered. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but assassinations are never a good way to go.
Yeah.
Well, and I think of this with your writing on slave revolts, Kellie, right? That they do often lead to crackdowns afterwards.
Yeah, it makes things worse. Yeah.
And they're also expressions of agency and resistance and pushing back. And I think that we have to be able to hold those competing ideas in our head at the same time. And we also have to I really do think we have to think about power when we think of propaganda of the deed, because think about the power of spectacle. Think about January 6th, which is propaganda of the deed. And because it had power behind it and money and propaganda and all of those things, it helped to reelect Donald Trump and led to the current situation that we're in now, which I think we could say is not great for most people involved. And I think that these are really complex and fascinating topics that we have to just allow to have all of these nuances and challenging aspects because you also don't want to say that there's no way for people to resist other than being trampled through nonviolent protest.
Yeah.
And, the Mangione trial has not started yet. It will soon, but and we'll see kind of how that narrative plays out. But I certainly think in the wake of that act, put aside the violence and the assassination, but just there was a moment where people were like, will this shake people into kind of having some real conversations and asking some deep questions about the healthcare industry in this country? And I don't think it really kind of
I think the profits are still good. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the sort of sad tale of it all.
But, in the same way that we look back at the progressive era now and we look back at the turn of the century and we say, oh, there's this larger, with retrospect, you see this larger narrative of people starting to ask these deeper structural questions. I still think we're living in a moment like that too, but you can't sort of disentangle and point to one specific event and say that was the time when everyone decided to ask some tough questions about healthcare.
Yeah.
And you can't tell the story in the middle.
Yeah.
Because we're at this moment in which support for Medicare for all is well above 50%, and where millions of people are about to get kicked off of Medicaid.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we don't know which one of those is going to win out. So we can't tell the story of what the Mangione murder means.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up by coming back to our two characters here. So I think we know that, Frick ends up living a long and storied life, and he starts to move a little bit towards philanthropy. And now most people, I've been to the new Frick. It is quite nice.
How nicer would it be, though, if it was named something else?
It might be. And Berkman gets sentenced to 22 years in prison as a 4-hour trial and conviction and sentencing. He's in Pennsylvania's Western Penitentiary. But then come 1918, there's the Anarchist Exclusion Act, and the government decides to deport Berkman. And there's a farewell banquet in Chicago where Berkman and Emma Goldman are there, and they are told the news of Henry Clay Frick's death. So 25 years later, Berkman ends up outliving Frick, and Berkman, who is on the eve of being deported from this country, is asked by a reporter for comment, and he has this line where he says, well, Frick has been, quote, deported by God, and that he's glad that the titan of industry has left this country before he had. So there you go. I guess he gets the last word.
And not deported to heaven.
He dies in France in 1936. There was talk of having him buried in a kind of prominent cemetery in Chicago near other people who had died in the Haymarket Massacre, but his supporters couldn't afford the expense, and instead he's buried in a common grave in France, in Nice.
South of France isn't the worst place in the world to spread your ashes.
No.
I suppose. That's right.
He's still with the people.
Yeah. All right. Well, super interesting. I'm glad we got to it. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Rename the Frick.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.